So what we want to talk about now is we talked in the previous video about what sine and cosine and tangent were in terms of finding them as labeling them as opposite over hypotenuse and adjacent over hypotenuse and opposite over adjacent. But now we want to use them to actually find a missing side or an angle. Okay? And the reason they work is because the ratio is the same for every right angle triangle for those angle measurements. Okay? So I just want to show you that, just a simple example. If you look at this triangle here, okay, and I'm just looking at that angle, then the opposite side is 20, and the adjacent side we don't know, and then the hypotenuse is over here. Okay, so we have the opposite side of the hypotenuse, and here the same thing, we have the opposite side and we have the hypotenuse. Okay, so if I take the sine of the heart, all right, here it's 20 over 40, opposite over hypotenuse, which is 0.5. Okay, here the sine of the heart, okay, is 7.5 over 15, which is also 0.5. So no matter what, if you have an angle, and that angle actually, if I reveal it now to tell you what it is, all right, the angle is 30 degrees. So it doesn't matter, the sine of 30 degrees is always 0.5. And if you take a calculator, just to show you on the calculator, if you, oops, I don't want my calendar, I want my calculator. If I take the sine of 0.5 on a calculator, it'll tell me every time sine of 30, actually I got to type in 30 first, I guess, and hit sine, is 0.5. So it doesn't matter what the ratio of the sides are, in the sense that the size of them, the ratio of them, if the angle is 30, is always 0.5. All right, I'm just going to get rid of my calendar here. So you need to be able to use your calculator to actually find the values of that, or you can actually use a reference page, which is called a trig table. Before calculators, that's what everybody used. Now, most of the time, we're actually using a calculator, all right? But you need to be able to use your calculator properly. So what happens is some calculators, you can type in sine of 30. You can actually hit sine and then hit 30 and then hit equals. Some calculators, like this one, you have to type in the 30 and then hit the sine button, okay? Or if it's 22, then you have to hit the cosine button, all right? The other important thing is that you have to be set in degrees. You should see a DEG button or a D somewhere. Your calculator's default to degree mode, but there are other modes. If you click that button, I can change the radians or gradients on this calculator, and you can do it on yours as well. So make sure that you are in degrees. So in order to do that, we're just going to do these questions and sort of just say, can you get these ratios to work? So I want you to take your calculator, and it's important that you have your calculator out and you're doing these, because it's really an important skill to be able to use a calculator to find these. So my calculator makes me hit 62 and then sine to get that answer. Okay, and it asks me to do it to the nearest thousand, so it's 0.8829. Sorry, 10,000, so 0.8829. Okay. The sine of 14, we're going to hit 14 and then sine, and we get 0.2419. All right, the cosine of 60, I'm going to type 60, and then I'm going to hit cosine. Again, on your calculator, you may have to hit something else. And then, in other words, you might have to hit it in a different order, not something else completely, but you might have to hit cosine first, for example. Then I'm going to get this one as 0.8572. And then tan, again, same thing. I'm going to hit 79 and then hit tan. And that's 5.1446. And the tan of 25 is 0.4663. Okay, so you should be able to get those on your calculator as well. Just make sure you know how to use your calculator, because it's going to become very important as we solve problems, either to find sides or find angles. If you are using your calculator incorrectly, you could get all the wrong answers, even though you're setting the question up properly. So it's really, really important you know how to use your calculator. Okay, so let's talk about how to find a side. So we're going to use the technique we talked about in the previous video. We're going to label the sides first. So the angle that I know is 30. So this is opposite that. So that's the opposite side. And the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. So that's the hypotenuse. And so I'm looking for the opposite side, and I have the hypotenuse. So I'm going to identify right away, I need to use sine. All right? Because sine is the ratio of opposite over hypotenuse, and that's what I have. And I'm going to write it out. So I'm going to write out sine of 30 is equal to x over 12. Okay? And then I'm going to try to solve for x. So I'm going to do that by multiplying the 12 up there. So I'm going to get x is 12 sine 30. Okay, and then you should be able to do that on your calculator. You may have to do it in steps. The first step is the sine of 30 is 0.5, and then times it by 12, so you get 6. Or you may be able to, on your calculator, type the whole thing in at once, but you should get x to be 6. All right. If we look at this one, same thing. We're going to look at what side do I want. That side in reference to the angle that I have is the opposite side. And then the side that I know is actually the adjacent side. It's the side that's touching the 42 degrees. I don't know the hypotenuse, right? I have nothing about it. So that means I'm going to select tangent as the trig ratio because it uses opposite and adjacent. So I'm going to write tangent of 42 is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. And then I'm going to solve for x again by multiplication. So I'm going to multiply 21 by the tangent of 42. So I'm going to take my calculator. I'm going to take 42 times tan, not times tan, but the tangent of 42. And then I'm going to times that by 21. And it becomes 18.9 meters. All right. And again, you need to do that on your calculator. It's really important you use your calculator properly to do those questions. So check your calculator. All right. Now, what if the unknown is in the denominator? So what happens if these last two we multiplied, right? Because x was in the numerator. But what happens if when we write out a ratio, x is in the denominator? So I look at an example like this. So I know this is my angle that I know. Okay, that's the hypotenuse because it's across from the right angle, and this is the adjacent side. So that means I'm going to use cosine, all right? Because cosine of 51 is adjacent over hypotenuse. Now, if x is in the denominator, we cross multiply and divide. In other words, we multiply the x up here. So we get x cosine of 51 is equal to 10, and then we divide. All right, so we get this. Effectively, what happens is these simply switch places. So if x is in the denominator, you divide by the trig function. So what we're going to do is we're going to take on my calculator the cosine of 51, and it gives me 0.6293, and then I'm going to take 10 divided by that 0.6293, and it's going to give me 15.9. Okay? So we'll do another example here. There's my angle, 40 degrees. So I look, first of all, that's the opposite side, and this x is on the adjacent side. So that means in this case, I'm going to use tangent, right? I'm going to use opposite and adjacent. So the tangent of 40 is the opposite side, which is 20, over the adjacent side, which is x. And then, again, all I'm going to do, I'm going to simplify it for you. You just switch those values, so it becomes 20 divided by the tangent of 40. Okay? So again, I'm going to take, if you can do it all on your calculator once, please do, but I'm going to take that as 0.839, and then I'm going to take 20 and divide it by 0.839. And that comes out 23.84 to 23.8. Okay, and that's my answer. So that's the idea behind finding a side, okay? So here's some more examples for you. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll pick a couple to do. So let's look at question 14 here. So here's my angle. I'm going to label my sides first. That's my opposite side then from that angle. That's what x is. And the side that I know is the hypotenuse. So that means I'm going to use sine, because sine of 60 is going to be opposite, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 17. Then x is on the top, so I multiply. So x becomes 17 times the sine of 60. I take my calculator, type in 60, hit sine, and then multiply by 17. And that gives me 14.72. So I'm going to just round it to 14.7. Okay, I'm going to leave some of these for you to do, and I'm going to do some of them with you. So I'll leave 13 for you to do. Let's look at 15. So here's my angle. X is the adjacent side then, because it's the one that's touching it. And 20 is the hypotenuse. So that means cosine. Cosine of 27 is going to be adjacent, which is x, over the hypotenuse, which is 20. So again, x is on the top, so I'm going to multiply. So I'm going to get x is 20 cosine of 27. And then I'm going to take my calculator. I'm going to take 27 cosine and then multiply it by 20, and it gives me 17.8. Okay, and that's my answer. And then we'll just do number 18. Again, I'll leave the other two for you to try. But here's my angle, right? 53. That's the opposite side then. And 12 is the adjacent side, so I'm touching the angle. So I'm going to use tangent. Tangent's opposite over adjacent. So I get tangent of 53 is the opposite side, which is x, over the adjacent side, which is 12. Again, x is on the top, so I'm going to multiply. So it's 12 times the tangent of 53. And if I do that, I go 53, I hit tan, and then I multiply by 12, and it comes out to 15.9. So that's what I'm going to round it to. All right. Now, what happens if instead of wanting to find a side, I want to find an angle? Okay. Well, what we have to use is what is called the inverse trig function. So we have to use, there's inverse sine, which I have written there anyway, but there's also inverse cosine and inverse tangent. And you will normally see them if you hit second function. So right now, you notice like I don't see them, sine, cosine, tangent, but I've hit the second function button. Now I do. Okay. And on your calculator, it may not be an arrow. It may be a second function button or a control button, but you should see them above. And what they do above the sine, cosine, tangent, what they do is they actually find the angle for you if you know the ratio. So sine 30 is 0.5. If you take the arc sine of 0.5, in other words, you know the ratio, that's the ratio. If you take the arc sine of 0.5, you'll get 30. So just to show you that, I type 0.5 and then I hit the arc sine, okay, it gives me 30 degrees. So what we're doing is we're going to sort of follow the same steps at the beginning, but then to solve for the angle, we're going to use the arc trig function. So here's what we have. We have an angle here, and we're going to label the sides the same way. So that's the opposite side. And across in the right angle is the hypotenuse. Okay. So we're going to write it out the same way, but instead of writing sine of the angle, we're going to write sine x because we don't know the angle. We actually know both sides. It's 2.5 over 5. Okay. And then to solve for x, we're going to take the arc sine. So this is where, or the inverse sine of that. Okay. So in order to do that on your calculator, you're going to take, on my calculator, I have to do this in steps. So I have to divide them first and then take the arc sine. You may be able to write it in again all at once, but it gives me x to be 30 degrees. So that's how I find an angle. Exact same procedure at the beginning. You label what you know, the two sides that you know based on the angle you're trying to find. You select the right trig ratio based on whether you have opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, or opposite over adjacent. And then you solve for x. But the solve for x, instead of multiplying or dividing like we did in the previous examples, now you're using the inverse trig function. All right, so let's look at another example. And this will be the last one that we do, and then you can try stuff on your own. But if we label this, that's the opposite side. Okay, and this is the adjacent side. So now we're going to use tangent. So it's 300 over 400. Okay. And then what we do is we say then x is the arctan, or the inverse tan, of that number, 300 over 400. So take my calculator. I'm going to take 300 divided by 400. Gives me 0.75, and then I'm going to take the arctan of that, and it gives me 36.9 degrees. Okay, so the angle of elevation there, the angle of elevation, which is what I'm trying to find, is 36.9 degrees. So that's how you use trig to find a side, and how you use trig to find an angle. And I'm going to leave it at that, and you can get more exercises from your teacher.